but it's taking a bit of time.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, let's start. So, a very warm welcome for everyone present, and really thank you for taking your time to attend this book launch on the brand new book, Teaching and Learning in Ecosocial Work. And today, under the special title, Teachers and Students as Ecosocial Activists, also with a question mark, we can discuss that later. My name is Satu Ranta-Tyrkkö, and I'm one of the editors of the book, and from the editorial team there is also Pieter and Komal Singh present. So maybe Komal, also you can still open your camera. And the idea today for a bit more than an hour is to introduce and also to celebrate this book. And the idea is also to provide you an idea of its content. And therefore, we have quite many chapter authors present. Those who are not are then there in the second book launch, which you are also most welcome to join next week. Yeah, I think we are now basically seeing the screen, but later on, chapter authors can also present themselves. Just to give you a brief overview of the book, which unfortunately is not available open access, is that it's a book with introduction and 13 chapters. In addition to which there are 5 shorter chapters, which are kind of case studies written from student or recently graduated student or practitioner perspective. And the book is divided in 3 parts. The part 1 is more about the concepts and conceptual approach. Part 2 is about practices of teaching and learning. And part 3 is about connecting teaching, learning, and practice. And it was not always so easy to decide where to place each chapter. But anyhow, this is how what we came up with. And I think that for today's theme also, these teachers and students and ecosocial activists, so also some other chapter authors could have been invited to speak, but these things are kind of overlapping. Just briefly about ecosocial work, how we understand it in the book. I think we understand it as an umbrella term for a holistic attempt to connect and put into practice different dimensions of sustainability in the work with different service users, groups, and communities, and also individuals. But at the same time, it's also important to see ecosocial work as something which is kind of beyond just work with individuals or communities, as kind of a more structural and political way of working. And also, I think what is kind of foundational for our book is that we understand ecological sustainability really foundational for any other form of sustainability. And therefore, also adjusting to planetary boundaries really of utmost importance to social work and the humanity and the planet overall. And I think what we really want to do with the book is to kind of support social work educators and professionals and students to kind of reflect the world from this, with these kind of ecosocial tools, and also kind of facilitate or build capabilities to envision and facilitate and implement change, and also to participate in the political processes needed. But I think this is enough at this point, and then I give the floor to Pieter.
If everything is right, you should see my screen. On behalf of the editorial team, I also wish you very much welcome. I am Pieter Lievens. I started teaching in social work in 2003 at the Thomas More University of Applied Sciences in Flanders, Belgium, that is in the middle of Europe. And there I started a course on international perspectives on social work that then further evolved in what is called dealing with global challenges. I don't see your screens at the moment, so I hope that you can confirm that there is now a new slide. The idea of dealing with global challenges was that we wanted to familiarize students with 6 crises, global crises that are existential. So basically, you find in my chapter these challenges, global challenges, which is also inequality, the knowledge crisis, the technology and the role of technology in let's say, progress, economic development, and so on. Also, this resource scarcity and resource depletion is an important chapter, together with the ecological crises like climate change or global heating and biodiversity loss or ocean acidification and so on. But also these social crises where you see that there is growing inequality and also a population on the planet that has a very huge impact. And the most important element there that I took as a key message for students is that the let's say the problems are so fundamental that they really challenge the basics of humanity and even the basics of a civilization. So that's why they need forms of social work that prioritize a sustainability transition. So if we have a kind of business as usual, we will have what we will always got, and this is like a planet and also other forms of life that are fundamentally in problem, and this will undermine the basics of our existence. And that is why there is, for me, and also in this course, an obligation for social work to be, and especially for eco-social work, to be really transformative. You need to change practices in such a way that they contribute to a sustainable future. And these practices, they go beyond what is like here and now in our society, today or tomorrow, and that goes towards like what is in other societies available, or what are resources there, or ecological effects like climate change, and also elements that will show up later when we continue with this business as usual. And there was for me a very important observation that social work is always kind of underway. And there was not a real answer there, and there was always like, okay, we think about it, we develop concepts, we develop theory, we develop some practice, but the answer didn't respond to the fundamental transition that was needed. And there is one element that I remember very well. It was exactly 5 years ago, where this, and this is also the topic of this book launch, should teachers or students be eco-social activists? And being a teacher at 2 universities of applied sciences on all these global challenges came together in the harbor of Antwerp, which was just 60 kilometers from the campus where I was teaching. And there, INEOS, which is a major petrochemical player, released the plans to build a new petrochemical installation, which was going to be the largest in Europe of the last 30 years. And for me, all these global challenges like plastic pollution, where one of my students who did a placement on the Scheldt will speak about later, but also this climate change, because this petrochemical installation caused a lot of global heating, but also this inequality in the world, because it was also owned by one of the richest people on the planet. So basically, it's a kind of machine that makes these people more richer. And also the fact that there was a lot of means of the government, like subsidies and investment support that was going to this project, and so on. So for me, this was a kind of a practical example where all the challenges that I was teaching about came together. And that was for me one of the main like eye openers. I need to do something more with it than just like teaching and bringing theory. That's where somehow I also started to become a little bit an activist, where we had this public hearing on that project, and where I participated in collecting objections against this plant. And over 10,000 people signed the objections that I then delivered to the local government. There is also one chapter in the book that I would like to share with you today, and that is that teaching this eco-social work gives me as a teacher a lot of like difficulties, because it is somehow always a struggle. Like, is the concepts, for example, that I teach on plastic or on biodiversity, or even on like climate change, is this an element of social work? And also for students, and maybe you can ask later on one of my students, like how difficult it is technically to take this holistic position as a social worker, where it is very much more easy to do just at the day-to-day things there. And also these students, which are like 20 years old, they have been taught for whole their career that there is a kind of progress in society. They have hope for the future, and somehow when you teach these crises and the state of the planet, this gives anxiety, this gives grief also on the future, and also on all this nature that is lost along the way. And also in the team with my colleagues where I teach it, it gives me also some kind of identity. Right? What is my expertise when you teach this? Suppose you're a professor and you give some advice on dementia, people will never say like, okay, you have like political ideas behind it, or you will, and your expertise will be challenged. But if I have an opinion, for example, on a petrochemical plant in the harbor of Antwerp, they say like, this is your opinion. No, for me, this is really like science-based. I have facts and figures on that. And that is some polarization in society also that enters the classroom, and that makes learning and also teaching very difficult for students. Because basically what you do as a teacher, you always question this status quo in society. And also, yeah, on my personal level, this is very difficult to realize all these facts and figures on biodiversity and climate change. Because, for example, I had a daughter, and she will be probably alive in 2100, and I know by teaching this topic that she will live in a fundamentally different world in 2100 than the world that I live in today, in terms of climate change, but also in terms of biodiversity. There is, as the crises that I teach are existential, there is a huge risk that the basic premises and all that the values that I give her in my education and in my uprising of a child, that is no longer true in the future. So somehow this teaching of crisis is pessimistic, and that is also something to deal with, actually. Another element that could be maybe some food for thought and a discussion later on is that, yeah, if we want to be eco-social workers and we face the challenge of climate, then should we focus our attention on mitigation, combat for global heating, or maybe we should just, like, as social workers, deal with adaptation? And there is already now some effects of global warming, especially in the global south, where social work has a very huge role to play. And I think compared to technicians and engineers, we do have a big role, because often solutions to climate disruption are presented as some eco-modern issue, and especially in the environment where I teach, this eco-modern position where there is a belief in this techno-fix is very dominant. And as soon as you, as a teacher, say, no, there's also other visions possible, like, for example, a post-humanist or a post-sustainability position, that is often understood as inappropriate or ineligible. So basically, social work there has really is to mean for society where we can open up the perspective and try to have other perspectives than just this eco-modernist position. And we can do this by hoping what we aim for, like we would like to have this in society, and then we can start working on from there, local and now, but with this global and later perspective in our mind. And the last element there is that I find very, very important, and that is also why I think it's very important that we meet here online now, is that most of the institutions of like education or schools of social work, they have managerial approaches, but I think they do have a huge social accountability. So they should take responsibility in these global challenges and really take position and say this is the values and the framework from which we start teaching our social work. And this was an element that I lacked very much in my last institution where I teach, where it should really be clear that you have a mandate to say that we don't follow this eco-modern position, and that also other positions on eco-social transformation can be valid for that. So basically, I have spoken now about 10 minutes. This was the plan. Maybe you can save your questions for later, or you can post them now already in the chat, and then we can have a discussion a little bit later. So I would like now to give the floor back to Satu, and she will elaborate a little bit more on this materiality and transition. And now I also shall stop the sharing of my screen so that we can see each other again.
And I believe you can hear me again. So we have a little bit ambitious timetable because we wish that many chapter authors can speak. But just to say about my topic, materiality and transition, the reason behind is that my chapter in the book deals with materiality and how to approach it in connection to the ecosocial transition in social work education. And there are many reasons why I decided to write about this topic, but perhaps the most decisive reason for taking up this issue stems from my postdoctoral research, which I conducted some 10 years ago. And this research was on mining industry and its social and also social work ramifications. And that postdoc, for a time at least, it made me to see the world as a constant flow of materials, particularly in metals and minerals, while I also observed the often very negative ecological, economic, social, and health consequences of those very same material flows into localities near to mining sites. And therefore, my chapter, instead of material deprivation, which is typically the focus in social work, it's about the taken for granted and normalized material abundance typical to affluent societies and lifestyles. And I think in well-off societies and social classes, material abundance is so commonplace that actually in those societies, even the poor and the disadvantaged sometimes end up having more stuff than they can actually manage. And this is because the current economic system really pushes us to own an awful amount of kind of material stuff, but then managing that requires capacities that not everyone has every time available. And at the same time, while this is taking place, there is a huge and urgent need to really drastically reduce our material imprints and the kind of ecological destruction it causes. So how the chapter goes, it starts with an overview of different materialisms, which I wanted to highlight. And my claim, relying on authors who have thought about these issues far more thoroughly than me, is that while the so-called new materialist perspectives open important new ways to think about materiality, also, for instance, historical materialist theorizing is really useful to understand the present world, especially relations of dominance and power in human societies and also in human nature relations. So my own position is maybe like open to new materialist thinking, which I anyhow sometimes find hard to grasp, and kind of utilizing this kind of historical materialist perspectives. Yeah, so that's about materialities. How the chapter proceeds, it proceeds by discussing our everyday excess and the centrality of all kinds of material stuff in our lives. Then it moves to the emotional side of witnessing and contributing to the ecological and climate crisis, and finally discussing what could be more sustainable materialism and what our political starting points and abilities to proceed to that direction are. And maybe the kind of pedagogically useful aspect of the chapter is that each of these discussions is attached with one exercise that somehow deals with the same topics, and which can be then modified to different student groups by those who are interested. And these are exercises that I have tried in my own teaching, but they are not developed by me. They were initially developed either by the US-based, I think now retired, social work professor Fred Westhorn, or Finnish theologian Panu Pihkala, who then has worked extensively on climate and ecological anxiety and emotions. The first of the exercises is about personal relationship to property and possessing things, and what does that actually do to us. The second one is focusing on emotions, and the third exercise explores one's starting points for engaging politically, and it focuses on the kind of packages such as values or belief systems or ideologies or behavioral models that one has gained as part of one's upbringing. In a way, the kind of like what we have if we try to think about some political action. Yeah, and now it's almost a year since I completed that chapter. And if I'm thinking of it now, I think that the weakness it has is that it still is quite individualistic and remains at the individual level. I think when I was writing it, my idea was that the kind of personal level is easiest to grasp, both for me and for my students. And the kind of exercises that are there, they at least help to perceive that each of us is really implicated, you know, in the change or in the issues we would like to change, but also to help explore the starting points to engage kind of with more political, structural and macro forms of social work. I think in the kind of Finnish educational context from where I write, the question really is like how to enable and empower my students to also take on kind of structural and political modes of work, and that they anyhow do as individual social workers. Yeah, anyhow, although there is this kind of shortcoming, I do think, and I hope I managed to claim it also in the chapter, is that reducing the material imprint of our lives is not just about our individualist consumption choices, but in a really big way, it's about the high-level political and economic decision-making. But then anyhow, if that high-level politics and economics fails to bring about any kind of ecosocial transition, there is still and anyhow a lot what we can do individually and especially collectively, and we can try to bring change into the communities and collectives where we are present, and in that way we can be far more powerful than as individuals. So so to conclude, there surely are ways for social professionals to promote and be the change, even though the change also has to take place in other levels and scales. And maybe that's that's the summary I was able to make about my chapter. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Satu. the floor is now for Mr. Skinner, Alex Skinner, and he speaks about the margins. I see also people applauding in the reactions. Thank you for that. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them in the chat. And the floor is now to Mr. Skinner.
Cool.
And you can very well share your slides if you had some.
Yes, I'm hoping to do that now. I'm seeing if they are coming up. I will.
I see you do have a lot of slides, so I hope you don't mind that I will keep the time very closely.
Yes, yeah, I won't. Yeah, I won't go over. I'll go quite briefly.
Thank you for joining us.
So this chapter is called Ecodiversity at the Margins: Permaculture as an Ecosocial Pedagogy for Social Work, co-written with Debbie Lynch, who can't be here tonight because it's after midnight here in Australia where we are. But I did just want to start with a brief acknowledgement of country, which we always do in Australia, where we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands that we're speaking from. So where I am in Brisbane or Meanjin, that is the Yagara and Turrbal peoples. And I think that that's an important thing to do in this space where we're talking about ecosocial concepts, to consider the people that have cared for country since time immemorial. So I just wanted to extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and to First Nations people across the world. So briefly, the reason why we chose to write about ecodiversity at the margins is that we're interested in natural system diversity and see that that's where systems are the most resilient, is where they're the most diverse. So we believe the same thing about systems of thought. And so we're not promoting one kind of ideology or one methodology, but we're using a method of permaculture as a framework to hold diverse thought. And we're also interested in the margins because that's where we as social workers often work with people who are marginalized, and often some of the best ideas can happen at those margins. So people that aren't as embedded in the status quo or the mainstream. And so we think of that in nature as well. So the frame that we are using and adapting is there's a movement called permaculture, which comes from permanent agriculture. Many of you will be familiar with this. It came out of Australia in the 1970s, but it's borrowed on a lot of ideas from around the world. It started as a system of gardening, essentially, and the way is to observe and work with natural systems and the energy flows. So there's multiple uses for each element in a garden. So that picture there is of a herb spiral where there's different miniature ecosystems for different plants. So it's a very observant way of farming and gardening with minimal inputs. So I won't talk to this for too long, but one of the things that sort of opened my eyes was planting trees on a property in Mullaney in Australia, and the macadamia farmer was growing macadamia nuts. And at that point, they were shipping them to China to get cracked and then shipping them back and selling them in Australia as local macadamia nuts. And that was a sign where I was thinking, this system is very crazy. And a lot of what we're doing as social workers isn't going to mean much if we keep using resources to this crazy extent. So some of the ideas we talk about in the chapter, observant humility, which I think is a really important frame for social work, for eco-social work. So we think about how to observe first before doing anything. And that's comes from the observation of the natural world, but it also is something we try to embed in students without jumping to intervention. So first doing no harm. And there's some other key ideas here. So one is multiple uses, which came out of permaculture thinking, and we come to one of the things as well that influenced the writing of this chapter was that when talking to students, I realized, and we've realized this, that they already know. They know the depth of the crisis. They want the examples. They want to start making the links. They want the tools so that they can create change, and they want the words so that they can explain this to others, and they want to be able to explain how social justice is environmental justice. So we thought we're not going to waste time explaining what climate change is, what's happening in the world. They're often ahead of us on that because they're living it. So the things that we were hoping that we could contribute to this discussion were ways of framing up some concrete examples that we can use in teaching and learning. And so we've got case studies that we use in our teaching in Australia, and have tried out with students. And we've got several examples of this kind of ecosocial thinking and how it's working in practice. So we're drawing these ideas into the classroom. We're having classrooms outside as well, and we're teaching multi-scalar sort of work, so from the small scale to the large scale. So that includes activist techniques and being political. So where we were interested is where that we could incorporate it into our teaching. So, and this came from some work that's cited here. And the notion is that we are at the point of transforming our profession, but as Pieter alluded to as well, we're in these systems of universities where, while we're working for that transformational change, sometimes we have to work within what we're doing. And unfortunately, the crisis is moving faster than our bureaucracy is. So we're bolting it onto the curriculum, we're embedding it through the curriculum, but we're also working towards transforming the curriculum. And there you go. That is clocked in just under 7 minutes. So thank you very much for that. And
thank you very much.
I look forward to hearing the rest of the chapters.
Very brave of you to join us in the middle of the night. We are very grateful that you.
Thank you.
Also, for this presentation, the questions can arise later on. The floor is now to the fourth speaker already, and that is Janet Carter and Anand Anish, if I pronounce it well, which we will talk about rethinking pedagogy. Could you please step forward and get the floor? Janet, maybe I can unmute you.
Okay. Thank you very much for that introduction. And Anish and I will present together as we represent both the Indian and the Finnish perspective on our chapter. Our chapter was Rethinking Transnational Social Work Pedagogy for Climate Change, Migration and Crisis Preparedness. And the authors were myself, Anish, Manish, Bipin and Satu. I will initially just talk about why we embarked on this chapter, and Anish will probably talk, or hopefully will talk a little bit about the actual research that we based our chapter on. So I will start by talking a little bit about the rationale behind our chapter and the need to reform curriculum. Dedicated curriculum on social change and crisis preparedness and migration remains on the peripheral to most European university-based social work education programs. And I think the previous speaker, and we found this to be the case, there are many obstacles that stand in the way of much needed changes to European curriculum. I must explain that our interest in regards to climate change, crisis preparedness and migration reflected our own interest in terms of social work research. And we've had a very long collaboration together, these partners, over many years on exchange programs. So this is why our chapter reflects these issues. There is a real need for refiguring of crisis and crisis preparedness for a more sustainable curriculum. And arguably transformative and critical learning theories provide an important way forward for the exploration of greater global mindedness. I really liked the previous speaker's comment about the fact that students themselves are already quite advanced in some of this thinking, and our role is really to facilitate that. We also wanted to emphasise the centrality of critical reflection, dialogue, and rational discourse through a commitment of engaging openly with others, and developing reciprocal and open relationships with our partners, and exploring alternative pathways so as to expand ecological and political consciousness and social solidarity. The chapter really was based on our experiences of teaching a winter school on climate change, migration and crisis preparedness in social work, which was taught in January in 2023 in India, in Mumbai and Kochi. And the actual course was part of a broader funded Team Finland Knowledge Higher Education Mobility project called Sharing Best Practice in Crisis Preparedness in Social Work, which is funded by the Finnish National Agency for Education. The project partners were the University of Vascular, University of Eastern Finland, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, and Rajagiri College of Sciences. And Anish, I might ask you now to just say hi and to talk about our approach.
Thank you so much. I would like to speak a little bit about our experiences and how we approached our whole project, and the learning from that is reflected in the chapter we have written. So the approach to teaching adopted was a pedagogical framework, which was designed to provide a structured and systematic approach or model to crisis preparedness that guides the planning, development, and implementation of educational practices and strategies. The course presentations were delivered from a multidisciplinary perspective, including science, economics, social sciences, and from the interconnectedness of sustainable development goals. Inclusion of both local and global perspectives on issues encourage students to understand the global impacts of climate change and its effect on local communities and indigenous cultures. The transnational nature of the course helped to engage students in practical activities and community-based projects related to climate change. The inclusion of guest speakers, experts in the field, and field trips facilitated this experience together with the relatively informal nature of teacher-student engagement. Students are encouraged to think critically about climate policy and their position to advocate for structural change at local, national, and international policy levels. Overall, solidarity was a concept enhanced by this cross-border program, which fostered a sense of unity, cooperation, and support among social workers in times of need, hardship, or crisis. This framework not only aimed to educate students about the science of climate change, but also empower them to act and be responsible citizens. I would like to quote two quotes from two of our participants in the whole project. One Indian student and from a Finnish student. I quote, "I learned about the Sami indigenous community and their struggle with livelihood and climate through this winter school program, which is now very useful in my international social work and indigenous people class. The knowledge present in this program helped me to understand the role of government and social workers in Finland. I could also know the differences and similarities between social work practices in India and Finland." Unquote. The second quote, I quote, "All the components of the course were different from the usual classroom experience and so valuable and monumental in my academic journey. The insights received through lectures and panel discussions were not read before. The field visits and the group assignments was a great experiential learning as it showed how classroom learnings can be implemented effectively on ground." Unquote. Over to you, Janet.
Thank you very much, Mr. Anish. for your contribution from India. I'm really happy that you were able to join us. From India, we go to Antwerp, Belgium, where one of my former students, Luna Haine, is going to speak about a practice in Stormkop, but it's probably possible for her to start introducing herself. I hope it is possible to unmute her. Good luck. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. So I'm Luna Haine, a recent graduate of social cultural work, and I had the pleasure of being one of Pieter's students, and I'm really happy to be here. So today I'm excited to share a piece of my journey with you, one that blends my passion for the environment, social work, and my creativity. My chapter explores the intersection of social work and environmental activism, and it's rooted in my internship at Stormkop. It's a unique organization in Antwerp. It's an experience that shaped not only my understanding of the environment, but also my vision of social work and the education around it. Growing up, nature was always a safe haven for me. It still is, and I would like to protect it and keep it safe. My family and I, we planted 3,600 trees a few years ago, which sparked an even deeper connection to the environment. I also took part in the climate protest during high school, of course. These experiences planted more seeds for my commitment to environmental issues, but my real turning point came during my internship at Stormkop, about which I wrote in my chapter. And for those of you who don't know it, Stormkop is an NGO based in Antwerp, close by the Schelde River. It's a place where art, science, and sustainability come together in a hands-on creative way to inspire both children and adults. Stormkop mission is to ignite curiosity and reflection in young minds, like students, and especially around the themes of pollution, climate change, and our responsibility towards the planet. During my time at Stormkop, I had the opportunity to work directly with children, supervising camps, class days focused on pollution and plastic waste. We did it by taking the children out to youth. Youth means collecting litter along the riverbanks, where all sorts of trash accumulate. You'd be amazed at the variety of the things we found there. The tiny plastic granules called nurdles, which are the raw materials for plastic products, stood out the most. But after each cleanup, we encouraged the children to transform these waste materials into art, something they could use or look at, from sculptures to musical instruments. And what struck me most was how Stormkop approached environmental education, not with lectures or guilt trips, but with creativity and empowerment. And by creating art from waste, the children not only learned about pollution, but also found a way to express their thoughts and emotions about it. They left with more than just knowledge. They left also with a sense of agency and responsibility. And for me, as the one doing the internship, it was the same. So this approach resonated with me deeply because during my studies in social work in Antwerp, I often felt there was a disconnect between theory and action. We learned a lot about advocacy and community engagement, but I wanted to see more of the real world applications, more hands-on work, like what I experienced at Stormkop. This internship filled that gap for me, so very glad. But it taught me that social work isn't just about addressing immediate social needs, it's also about fostering long-term change by involving people in the process of rethinking how we interact with the world around us, starting with the children. The key points I wanted to highlight in my chapter revolve around Stormkop's philosophy. It's touch, see, hear, and feel. This philosophy isn't limited to environmental issues. It can be applied to any social work context. Touch, see, hear, and feel by encouraging people to engage with the world around them through all of their senses. We made abstract issues like pollution or social inequality more tangible and understandable. Stormkop also operates on principles of vulnerability, bravery, assembly, and uprising, values that I believe are crucial in social work. And I believe that social work and environmental activism are inseparable. In the future, social workers will increasingly be called upon to address social impacts and climate change, whether it's climate migration, poverty, the psychological effects of natural disasters, which they are experiencing right now. The internship reinforced my belief that environmental issues are not just scientific or political, they're also deeply social. And as social workers, we need to be equipped to handle these challenges. And we can start by the way we educate. I hope that readers of my chapter are left with a sense of possibility and an understanding that the fight against environmental degradation can and should evolve social workers. We are in a unique position, I think, to mobilize communities, advocate for systemic change, and support those who are affected the most. And I believe that integrating environmental education into social work programs is crucial. Just like Stormkop uses the creativity and curiosity of the children to inspire action, we too can find ways, I believe, to engage our communities and bring about meaningful change. So in my conclusion, my experience at Stormkop not only expanded my awareness of environmental issues, but also enriched my understanding of what it means to be a social worker and a social work student. It showed me that we must not shy away from the big issues like climate change, but rather embrace them as a part of our education and profession. And most importantly, it taught me that in the face of these overwhelming challenges, hope and action and education should go hand in hand. So thank you for listening. I hope my chapter can inspire you to consider how we can all contribute to a more sustainable world, whether as social workers, educators, or simply citizens. So thank you for listening.
Thank you for sharing your experience, Luna. I see a lot of reactions also in the chat, very nice. Thank you for people who share their reactions. From Antwerp, we go to Ireland, but was it Kirk to Mrs. Hurley? The floor is for you, and you will talk about how to green the curriculum.
Thanks very much, Peter. I'm very struck, Luna, by your presentation. Thank you so much. I found it exciting and intellectually stimulating, but at a personal level, it really connected with me at an emotional level, so thank you. So our chapter is, I suppose it really started back in 2017, 2018, when my colleague Pieter and I started having conversations about our passions, which were social work activism, really, and I have a particular interest in the environment. So Pieter has been very heavily involved in LGBTQ rights in the university and at a national level, and he's also been involved in EPIC, which is an advocacy group for young people in care, and my activism was around an anti-incineration campaign that I've been involved in for over 20 years, and it's still ongoing. And I suppose from that experience of being involved at a local level in a community, I think I learned a lot about what I value and what's important to me as a social worker and as an educator. So myself and Pieter worked together, and we found ourselves having these conversations about our students and how activist or not they were really. So we decided to do a little bit of research, and we did, and we found, a surprise, that a lot of students aren't terribly activist at all. What counts for activism can be something as minimal as, you know, a like on a social platform. There were some students who were a little bit more political, but by and large, students were, you know, they had a level of activism, but not what I would call heavy duty activism. And within that research, there was no mention whatsoever, high up or low down, about the environment. And I found that really alarming, that we were in this existential crisis, which is climate change, that our students had no representation of that in our group. So we did a presentation of our findings, and one of our colleagues, Catherine Ford, who's the other editor in this book, made contact with us, and we started again having more cups of coffee and more chats about, well, what are we going to do? Catherine teaches community work students, and Pieter and I teach the social work students. So we decided maybe it was time to actually put together a module for our respective programs, and that's really what's happened. And that was about, we started the rollout of the module in 2021 in the middle of COVID. Probably not the best time in the world to be doing it, but we got it launched, and it's in its third year now. And it's been a very exciting, concerning, uplifting, challenging, is the whole gamut of emotions in terms of the experiences. The things that have worked really, really well is bringing two groups of students together from different disciplines. They have to work together to do bits of assignments. They have to contribute to discussions together. That has really been very stimulating for the students to share their ideas across community work and social work. And we're hoping to expand that into our nursing colleagues as well, because we really believe the need to have interdisciplinary connections is vital if we're going to have any strength at all in terms of addressing the issues of climate. The challenges then, we realise that when students go on placements, they see very little eco-activism, certainly at any formal level. It's certainly not recognised as such by the students, because they don't have the language. The organisations that they are on placement in do not use eco-social terms at all, even though very often practitioners are using what we would call eco-social practices in their practice. So we think there's a job of work we need to do to, I suppose, imbue the language and give practitioners confidence around naming what they're doing in practice. For example, social farming, using community gardens, all of these things are being done in Ireland at the moment, but it's certainly not claimed as eco-social work. So the other part was our regulatory bodies make no reference whatsoever to the climate emergency. And I think that's something we need to, I suppose, lobby for and challenge, because I think practitioners are in environments where they're highly regulated. So they need support to be able to, I suppose, make claims to be eco-activists in their practice. So it's been an ongoing journey for us. We're very excited by what I suppose what we've encountered, but it is a very momentous task. But something when we started to write the chapter, I came across a quotation, and it really struck me very powerfully. And I managed to keep it in the chapter, at the top of the chapter, and my colleagues, were happy to support my You're not meant to have a quote of somebody else's at the start of your chapter, but I still love it. It's called, it's by Thich Nhat Hanh. He was a Buddhist monk, and he describes the need for a collective approach really to what we're doing. So he says, when we fall in love again with the earth, we will know what to do, and we will need a collective awakening that individuals do not awaken in isolation, but we need to awaken in community. And I couldn't say it better than that. So thank you.
Very well. It touches me. Thank you for sharing this. From Cork in Ireland, we go to Helsinki in Finland, where the floor is now for Mrs. Mona Livolts, who is speaking about the writing of ecological and environmental exercises by students. Mona?
Thank you very much. Well, thank you for all the presenters. I think it's very inspiring to be here, and it feels like this book feels like a very rich community. I was struck by that when I read all the topics of the chapters. So, and thank you to the editors. Okay, I want to say my chapter is called Becoming Environmental Writers, and there is a exclamation mark in English, utropstecken in svenska. And by putting this exclamation mark, I want to kind of encourage, like, this is possible too, because I think that, well, my interest come from the question that, I mean, as a researcher, as a teacher, whether it is taking on a specific topic of research or preparing teaching, it's more like, what should we focus on? And then, of course, how should we do it? But I think that the question of what do you think that your question calls for when it concerns writing? Like, what kind of expressivity is needed? So I think that here we often, sorry if I generalize, but I do it anyway, like we often see when we have an emergent new directions in social work, like ecosocial work, depending on how we see when it emerged, but post-anthropocentric social work that I'm more into, then I often do not see experimental work with the actual texts that we produce. So my point of view is like, if science is a storytelling practice, like Donna Haraway suggests, and others as well, I think then the question for me is, how do we as teachers, as researchers, how do we think about the narratives we produce and what kind of readings they are for our students? And I think that there is this gap often between very engaged topics and the importance of the topics, but very distant, strict academic language that I suspect often then detach readership, because our texts are communicative acts and they also form structural conditions in academia. So my departure is that even though we have many valuable contributions, and I collect much of my inspiration from feminist, postcolonial, and indigenous scholarship that particularly have brought up this question of writing. So my chapter, it is built on, one could say, illustrations and scenes related to three themes, and it's autoethnographic to its style, but I would say that it can be very useful, I hope, for anyone who would like to use it collectively, because there are such also guidance. I have three themes. Childhood memories from growing up on a farm. I think about and reflect on different situations where I grew up. Like growing up on a farm, what was it like to sow barley, for example? What were the sounds of doing that, these chores? What was the wind like? How was it picking stones from the field? Because before the sowing, and this clock that I heard, I go back to childhood memories, and of course there is a selection of those, but I also then write about how can we use memory work as a practice in teaching for looking at specific situations that we particularly remember, and that can be anything, but to actually also, many have talked about the importance of words and language, but then how can we have practice with different ways of writing that? Exhaustion, you say in English, as a way of rewording social problems is the second theme. And there I draw on my work that I did during the pandemic, where I read texts about exhaustion and not extinction. I know, of course, that extinction is a serious problem, but I wanted to look at exhaustion as a kind of turning point for when a kind of mental and environmental exhaustion occurs, that can also be a turning point for creativity. So there I wrote very much a diary, and I took photographs, and that was a kind of slow writing in terms of you stop by things and places in your environment that particularly draws attention to that. And I found a lot of garbage along the way, but also scenes and relationship to the environment, close environment in this pandemic time that I found very important. And then the third is water as a pathway for social justice. So I've written a text called Writing Water a long time ago, when I felt like social work was such a strict discipline that didn't allow any leakages or movements of dynamic knowledge. So I wrote about that, and I wrote about my relationship to water in the landscape where I was at that time. And I have continued to do that and listen to others who write about water for social justice. So to conclude, then my chapter includes brief guidelines to make use of memories as a way of writing short stories about particular situations, attending to emotions and details. I write letters as communicative acts to the reader, and their letters are good because you can pretend that your reader is someone you know, but actually there is a large audience, but you can say things in letter writing in academic world that is difficult otherwise. I write diaries, and diaries, Philippe Lejeune has this word, sculpting life. Like writing a diary in any way you want is also an act of everyday life, of thinking and writing continuously. And poetry is, as you know, it's a quite precise language. It has a particular rhythm. Words become very important. It's kind of a third voice, and it's quite a good political way of working as well with art activism. So I hope that this environmental writing is a form of art activism to promote expressivity, creativity, and imagination also for others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mona, for your. I like it very much. Also, from Helsinki. From Helsinki, we go to Ireland again, where we will hear a story on wastewaters, where Katie McShane will talk about how water connects. This is also a student case study, one of the chapters that we have like dotted in the whole book. There are in total 5 student chapters. Good luck. The floor is yours, Phoebe.
And can you hear me okay?
Yeah, it's a little bit soft, but I think it's okay.
Well, I have been told I have a very soft voice, so I will try and project. Yeah, so firstly, I'd like to congratulate everybody involved in the launch of this really worthwhile book, and to say thank you on behalf of Elaine and myself for the opportunity to write about Wisewater and to share our experiences of teaching and learning in eco-social work. So I'd like to begin by sharing a little about my background and my learning and the development of Wisewater, and then to delve into the work that we do, water as an inspirational teacher for us in these times. So I experienced a crippling eco-anxiety between the ages of 8 and 14. And this intensified due to the lack of action or care that I witnessed in the adult world around me. I left school early, finding no useful reason for being there. The curriculum was so disconnected from the reality of what I saw as extreme crisis in the world. And I was no Greta Thunberg. I didn't stimulate school strikes for the planet. But through the years, I was informally educated by working with young people and communities. I trained in the field of health and well-being, and it was through a shared love of water that I met with Elaine Moynihan. Together, we initiated many community events at different water sources. We also travelled around Ireland documenting people's passion for water, why and how they care for it. We witnessed the power of water to connect people to themselves, to others and the living world. And so Wisewater was born, and ideas for an education initiative began. We both attended University College Cork to study social sciences and become qualified as youth and community workers, even though we were doing the work already. And this was my first experience of formal education, providing a learning experience that was actually useful and relative. Being open to writers such as Paulo Freire and Kathleen Lynch, Indigenous educators and academic activism gave me such hope for how education can support social and environmental change and inspire young people today. Learning to critically analyze systems and constructs of power that mold and control society, and how the education system plays a very large role in this, strengthened the resolve to provide a new form of education for young people. So through our studies in University College Cork, myself and Elaine developed and piloted our eco-social programme in primary schools. We both also conducted primary research, Elaine on the physical and mental health benefits of being in and around water. My research was with primary school teachers to understand the pressures that they experience within the education system and to learn how well-being and environmental education is provided to young people today. Was there a need for Wisewater in schools? And the answer was yes. Meeting teachers who care in an uncaring bureaucratic system gave me both hope and despair. And I know that this is a group of professionals in this area, so I don't need to talk of the despair of bureaucracy, but I would love to share with you and offer the perspective and the hope that is at the heart of Wisewater's work. So our work is relational. Water connects us all in so many ways, transcending ability, race, gender, economic background. In our work with both young people and adults, we present water as a wise teacher, using multisensory activities that engage the head, the heart, and the hands to develop a new way of looking at water and its relationship to the current crises that we are in. But what is water? Water is so ordinary. We use it every day in so many ways, and especially here in Ireland, we are surrounded by it, so much so that we don't often think about it. However, those that study it call it extraordinary. Scientists are far from understanding what it actually is and how it behaves the way it does. Yet it is the foundation of sustainability. There is no future without water. It's that simple. In the talk of climate change, the prevailing narrative centers around carbon control. However, climate change is experienced through the climate, through water and its distribution around the world, through drought, through floods, through rising sea temperatures, melting ice caps, extreme weather. So why is water as a solution so often left out of the climate conversation when it can be so tangible, when it is such a tangible way to communicate what's happening in the world? The anthropocentric view of water calls it a resource to be used for our needs and functioning, to be managed for every single manufacturing process in our modern lives. There is not one thing around us right now which has not been made without water's help. However, Indigenous people remind us that water is not a resource. It is the source of life. So water is calling us to attention. Unfortunately, things have to become extreme for us to wake up, and water is very much calling us to awaken to it. It is the key to our well-being and to the planet's regenerative ability. We need a new perspective of water, and wise water is part of this wave of change. In order for us to protect it, we must reconnect with it and remember our relationship with water. And as we are primarily made of water, this relationship is very intimate. So as well as teaching us these larger planetary connections, water teaches us about ourselves. Water connects us to our senses, our physicality. Water nourishes and nurtures and gives so generously. Water bonds, teaching us of social connection and the power of collaboration and synergy. Water is receptive. It takes in sounds and substances. Water is reflective. It teaches us of our thought processes. Water connects. It knows no borders. It unites us intimately. It is both powerful and peaceful. Each drop is unique. And when united, a powerful force of movement occurs. So yes, that's a little snapshot of wise water. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing this with us, Katie. It is magnificent the way you tell it. It really goes for me directly in the heart, so to say. So I'm really happy what you said. It's really fantastic. And it learns me also how to see this climate and all the other challenges that I have in dealing with global challenges that essentially is water. I never mention it so often, but also the INEOS project that I mentioned in the harbor, for example, it uses every single hour the equivalent of 700,000 families for this industrial process to run, and it's pure drinkable water that they use every hour, equivalent to 700,000 families. So that is also this inequality and resources and so on. So thank you so much, Katie, for sharing this. And this brings us to the end. I give the floor now back to everybody, so to say, where we have some questions and closing remarks. If you want, I can share my screen on that for a little while so that you can have also a call to action, so to say, on this book, where we invite you to ask questions now, to subscribe to the newsletter that we have on the website, but also to share your projects, your news and research with our group of the special interest group within the European Association of Schools of Social Work. And hopefully also we ask you to promote the event of the 16th of October. And of course, we have many other options for guest teaching or for sharing expertise around us. But let's first go back to the questions and the questions indeed that we have in the chat. I see also that many people put their screens on. Thank you for doing this spontaneously. There is one question maybe that comes up. I'm not sure if Satu has been able to manage the questions a little bit, like which one are we going to take? I think also it's interesting for each of you to check it a little bit. There was one question from Sarah Banks, who was very interesting for me, where she asked if I got it right, or maybe she can ask a question herself again. So that would be an opening for the discussion. Would that be okay? Yeah, I think actually that she is available for asking the question in the group. Is that okay with you? I assume it is, isn't it?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's as everybody said, it's been so inspiring and enriching to listen to this huge diversity, but with all the same kind of holistic approach to viewing life and viewing social work as part of that life. So it's a simple question, really, which I think you're all confronting, we all confront. But I think this issue of eco-social in the context of the climate crisis and the other existential crisis that you mentioned, Pieter, it kind of drives us towards a completely new paradigm, which is antithetical to the capitalist world in which we live, with all its dualisms. And particularly, we still find, in spite of Vishanti's nice reply about all the different challenging feminisms, decolonial approaches, we're still working in this world where quite often social workers are supposed to be professional, that they have to act in a certain sort of separate, distant way. And the call to activism challenges that, as it does for many social workers who are radical or committed to a cause. So I was just interested in the perspective of some of the speakers here, particularly the ones who have described activism, called for activism, and how we can do that more in social work, particularly the traditional social casework, where as some of you said, your students are not experiencing anything to do with eco-social work at all, how they can play a role and maybe cause some workplace activism. So I was just interested to have some reflections on that, and maybe some conflicts that occur in your own institutions or with the students who are on placement.
Thank you for sharing the question with us. Who would like to take the floor? Is there anybody who could raise their hand, or to see if there is anybody able to put on the video? Well, I could also take the question. Yeah, Mrs. Hurley, you have the floor. Yeah, Mrs. Hurley from Ireland. Yeah, it's difficult to point to somebody, but you can go.
Me, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. I suppose we can't underestimate the challenge that students and indeed practitioners are encountering in practice situations. But what really struck me was I've spoken at the Irish Association of Social Workers webinars, on these matters. And the last one of these events that we had, it was a lunchtime event. It was an hour short, but the number of people who signed on for the period was quite high, and we were quite chuffed, myself and the CPT lady, at the number of young practitioners who were in attendance. And the conversation really went around we don't know how to have the conversations with our management, with our bosses. they didn't necessarily feel that there was profound resistance, but there was a disconnect between what they wanted to do and actually being performative in it. So I do think as academics and researchers, there is work to be done around breaking it down a bit and making, I think it was Mona was talking about, our language and how we communicate with our colleagues around, I suppose, the breadth of what we're trying to grapple with. And it is a huge, huge topic. So people are busy in their, environments. We have to be able to hone in and hone out in ways that are real for people, because otherwise I think we're just going to be written off, or we're going to become this greenwashing kind of strand that organizations will say, oh, we're doing that. So I think we do have to challenge ourselves as well to be able to communicate in ways that are plain speaking, for want of a better word. Yeah, and that's not to underestimate the challenge of the topics that we're involved in. It's not to simplify it either.
Is it okay if I go?
Yeah. Yes, please. I think Peter was about to say the same, but he was muted. So Vishanti, go on.
Sarah, I completely agree with you about, the hegemony of neoliberalism, capitalism, and positivism on our thinking. I'm not sure. I think it was Alex who mentioned the word observant humility. And I think that comes very much from the Buddhist Thich Nhat Hanh kind of teaching that was quoted here. And my question around that is that as academics, what's our complicity in perpetuating these paradigms? Because I often think that we talk left and walk right. And the whole notion, for example, of rankings and ratings, which perpetuates skewed power relations, and dominance across the global north and the global south. But almost all academic institutions have bought into that neoliberal ideology. So I think remaining obscure to ourselves is one of the greatest threats and dangers to this kind of vision that we all, I think, around the screen embrace, an alternative conceptualization of the earth, interdependencies, conceptualization of the earth and self as one, and you and I and everyone else as one unified whole. So where do we begin, if we remain obscure to ourselves and don't acknowledge our complicities?
Thank you. Yeah. I would just like to add one element on the question, like this activism. What in my mind is always very crucial is that by teaching all this knowledge on global challenges, I pretty detailed know in which kind of world the people were living in 2050 or in 2100. So by knowing that, I will never be able to say to my children or to my grandchildren or maybe even my grandchildren that I didn't know. And by knowing what is going to be like the physical world that humanity will live in gives me automatically a responsibility. For me, it's like a child which is like misused somehow. If you are like witnessing this abuse, you cannot pretend that you didn't see it. So by knowing, automatically there is a call, and a very strong call in my case, for activism. And I know that my institutes where I teach, they don't like that, because they want to be away from kind of what they call political goals. And that is why I often felt very much disconnected also to their goals, and also somehow kind of, a little bit unease on, like, I was always looked more closely on my expertise or on what I did with students than my other colleagues, basically. So that was an element that I wanted to share on this question.
And maybe I can still continue a little further. I think this is a huge issue to discuss, so it would require, I don't know, new sessions. But I don't know, maybe something. I think that the kind of narratives of neoliberal capitalism and how they have entered our institutions, we know that they are kind of hollow, or they are kind of increasingly hollow also for our own ears. And we are not so super happy of what they have done to academies or what they have done to our social work institutions, although, how to say, we have also deeply internalized them. So I think that really the challenge is to learn like new ways of being and doing and initiate new kinds of practice. But then it's not so easy because we are so used to survive in this kind of neoliberal game. But I think that there are many kinds of initiatives. Some of those are referred to in our book, and kind of new approaches. And I also see it in the generation of students that some things they do already differently than I do. But there is this need of this kind of collective elaboration on this, and what the social workers, for instance, interested in ecosocial practices in Finland always say that it's very difficult to make any change alone. There has to be support from other people. There maybe has to be a network so that you know that there are people who are like-minded. Yeah, we don't always need to sing exactly the same songs that are kind of strong, but then there are different days. So maybe each and everyone's activist capabilities are not equally high on every day, but there are moments when they are high. Then we can utilize them to start from something.
Thank you. Maybe somebody else would like to raise a question or to bring an issue on the table. I see that Jeff Peters has raised his hand, so I will give him the floor.
Yes, I want to add an idea. I'm a philosopher, so I was teaching, I'm retired, but teaching social philosophy and social ethics in social work, but also in other disciplines. And one of my important things to teach professional ethics was, as a professional, you're in the first place a citizen. You are, with your profession, contributing to society. And as such, I think that strategy to emphasize that citizenship is a way to bring in a discussion with your institutions, and that's the only thing I want to say. Yeah.
Very good idea, Mr. Peters. I like that idea very much. That's a good way to counteract some friction on that level. I know. Thank you. Somebody else would like to share something or to raise an issue or to point to a question that appeared in the chat? I think we have already spent a very long time, so it was longer than foreseen. This means that we can like finish the presentation unless somebody would like to stick and stay around. I don't see anybody who is raising the hand, so
I just want to say before you conclude, Peter, congratulations to all the speakers and on the production of the book. When I talked about all our complicities, I include myself in it. And when I talked about talking left and walking right, I did not, I want to say, refer to you as presenters. I think what you witnessed here was real passion to the course, and sometimes maybe that's what it's going to take, a couple of individuals with passion, with drive, who are as disturbed about what kind of future we're going to leave our children and grandchildren as you are, Pieter, that can maybe begin this process, of an evolved consciousness. And if we touch one another in that way, who knows the ripple effects it may or can have. So I think you have provided us with those messages of hope today, and that I find to be truly incredible, and was touched by that. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing this. I saw a hand rising also somewhere else, but it is disappeared. So I think unless somebody else on the editorial team would like to share something, we can finish it. Yeah, I remember now. It was from the University of Uvascula. Somebody raised a hand. I think it was a student, wasn't it? I'm checking if I can find it again.
But maybe that's no longer there. I think, Vicente, we know. Oh, I muted. Well, we know very well this, what you said about left and right. So I think that we are all, each of us is also familiar with that. I very much thank you for your time and attention. And it was exciting to have this book launch, so I'm I'm happy it went as it went. And I warmly welcome, in case you happen to have time, you to join for the second book launch as well, where some other chapters are introduced. Yeah, if possible for you. But thank you for being with us.
Thank you for being with us.
I also like to thank you, everyone, and hope to see you for the next session, which is on the 16th.
And don't hesitate to get in touch.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye.